that do game design, you know that this is a branch of game design which is really focused on player progression, on drop systems, loot systems, and it really needs to work very finely and very precisely in order for the player to have fun. But aside from this, what we're going to understand today is a lot of factors that are actually player-facing, that have something to do with player psychology and with human psychology, that also affect whether our systems are going to be well-designed or not. First, a little bit about me and about my studio. So Madhead Games went from designing hidden object games, very casual games, to the core market with our game Pagan Online, which you may have heard of. We just released it in August in collaboration with Wargaming, and it was a really big and fun challenge for us, and we had an amazing time developing it. An ARPG is in its essence a very system-heavy game, right? You have loads of numbers, you have loads of things that you need to take care of, and we're going to learn a little bit today how we did it for Pagan Online, what were the things that we did well, and what were some mistakes that we did, and what can we do better the next time. So let's begin with why do we even design systems? Like, what are systems for in games? Well, for once, we designed them to make our lives easier, right? If you had to design health or damage or drop system for every single enemy in your game, it would not be scalable, it would be really difficult for you, and every time when you wanted to add something new, it would be an enormous amount of job, an enormous amount of work trying to balance it and trying to make it viable for your whole game. But the other reason why we also design systems is to enhance player experience. In what way do systems enhance player experience? Well, in a way that this has something to do with our perception and our feelings inside of state of chaos and inside of state of order. Obviously, systems represent a state of order. They keep us from feeling hopeless, from feeling lost, and from feeling scared, right? Like when you're in a situation where nothing makes sense and when you can't do anything to repair it, then you feel hopeless, you feel lost, you feel like you have no agency whatsoever. In games, this isn't as dramatic as in life, but obviously chaos makes players feel lost, they don't know what to do, they don't know what they're supposed to work towards in your game, and ultimately it makes them feel bored. If they don't feel that they have any agency, then they will feel like there's nothing to do in your game and they should just drop it and play something else. We can also view this chaos-order dichotomy from the perspective of information theory, which is also very useful for us as system designers since it works with probabilities. So information theory says that the less likely an event is, and the less we know about it, it takes more cognitive power to process it, right? So imagine if I was standing here and I just want to build the next slide, that's something that you expect, something that has a high probability of happening, and obviously it would take you very little cognitive power to process this event. But imagine if I was standing here and all of a sudden a giant pink elephant falls from the roof and crushes me, you would really take a while to react to that because you did not expect it, and it's an event that takes an enormous amount of cognitive power to decide what should you do now, what should you do next. Should you run? Should you take a photo? Should you call someone for help? Like, it's a really cognitively loaded event. So the formula, which looks complicated but is actually really simple, looks like this. The amount of information represented by the eye is the logarithm, negative logarithm of probability happening. The less probable an event is, the more information it contains, and the more cognitive power of yours it takes to really process it. So this means that actually in system design, we need to work towards having systems that are comprehensible, so that don't take a lot of power to understand what's going to happen, what can happen, and on the other side, to make them rewarding. The more you get to know a system, the greater mastery you have over it, and the more rewarding it feels, right? We know this from myriad genres of games. For example, when you start playing a MOBA game for the first time, for example, League of Legends, you don't understand anything that is happening on the screen, you don't know where the character is, you don't know what's happening. But as you put more time into it, all of these systems become less cognitively loaded, they become more clear to you as a player, and you can work towards mastering the whole game. Right? So this is the way that we need to design systems also in games that are loot-based, that are progression-based. We need to make players understand them, and we need to reward them for their time. So let's see how this works on one example. That example for this case will be how to gain amazing loot in an ARPG. Pagan Online is very focused on the loot, very focused on improving your character through loot, and that's the main way you level up, right? The levels of the players are not as don't have as much weight on the way that you're going to perform in different encounters and in different battles. They are just kind of a prerequisite for wearing a specific set of gear, and that gear is something that you should really work towards if you want to be really good and reach the end game, and so forth. So let's imagine that we have one very, very valuable item that's very hard to obtain, and we communicate this by saying it has a low probability, right? So in order for something to be valuable in your game, in order for people to want it and to think of it as a status symbol, it has to have low probability. So for our example, we can have the super rare Sword of Mightiness, which is this very rare, very powerful sword that I just made up, and it has, for example, 1% chance of dropping from a specific boss. And some of you that maybe did system design for games like these would even argue that 1% is a lot for the most valuable piece of gear in the game, but for this example, let's just go with 1%. So once we designed this, and once we tested it out and see that it takes a desirable amount of time to gain this sword, then we need to ask ourselves, what does this low probability mean in player's mind? So when we tell them there is this awesome item and you have a pretty low probability of getting it, what goes through the player's minds in that moment? So in this example, we communicated the probability verbally, right? We didn't tell them you have 1%. We told them you have a really low chance of getting this. Like, this is a great thing, and it is pretty hard to obtain it. We as human beings actually have a tendency to think about these broad categories when it comes to probability. So we think about events that are unlikely, that have a fair chance of happening, and that also are very likely. So we told them, it is very unlikely you will get this, this awesome item. So what do you think? What are the numbers behind these categories? What is the number behind unlikely? What percent? 25, okay. What? 5. What is the number behind fair chance? 50. And behind likely? 75. Okay, someone is pretty well versed in the neglect of probability, and that is exactly correct. So when you tell someone that an event is unlikely to happen, they actually think it's going to happen in about 20% of cases, which makes our super awesome Sword of Mightiness drop 1/5 of the time. That means that if you tell a player that it is unlikely that he will get something, he probably expects playing the run for about 5 times before getting this item, which is insanely high. If it was only 5 times, games like Path of Exile and Diablo would have really few items and everybody would have them. I have really close friends and colleagues who have played these games for literal thousands of hours, 2,000 hours upwards, and there are still items that they have never gotten. They have never seen them in game, only on wikis, and similarly, even though they chase them. So 20% is really high. Okay, so we can maybe drop communicating probability verbally and decide that we want to communicate probability to players numerically. So we're not going to give them these vague categories that we as human beings can't operate with. We're going to just tell them, hey, you have a 1% chance of gaining this item. So if someone plays 5 times one run, and if he says, I didn't get this item, you know, most of the people will say, well, of course you didn't. It has a 1% chance. You should, on average, play it 100 times in order to hope to getting it. But this
communication is not without its problems, even though it offers a better and more consistent understanding. When we launched Pagan and when we launched some of our endgame systems, which contain the best loot that there is, we had the community make one single spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet on Reddit, where they logged their drops each time they played these runs. And the probabilities were there. They were pretty similar to what we designed, and they were not that strict as players perceived them, but because not every single person got them in this time frame, they were still pretty dissatisfied with the drop rates. So 1% means that on average you will get it in 100 tries, but not for everyone, right? This is only on very large samples. But, okay, the issues that arise from this, even if you understand it mathematically, is our tendency as humans to neglect probability. The most famous example for this, obviously, is the lottery, right? Like, you have such a small chance to become a millionaire from lottery, yet millions of people play it. Because if I just told you that you have a 1% chance, just by being in this room, to get 1 million euros, you would be ecstatic. Because we tend to focus on the outcome of a bet and not on the factors and the setup of it. If the outcome is really good, which hopefully in our game it is, like you will gain this best sword ever, best weapon ever, then players will neglect the low probability of gaining it and just be excited about a chance to win it. Very similarly with this is connected another psychological phenomenon that's called the framing effect, and that really works as a tendency to favor an option depending on the way that it's presented. This means that you present it in a positive loop. If you present it in a positive framework, you will be much more likely to take a bet than you present it in a negative framework. In psychology, this is most notable on the cases of medical emergencies, where if you tell someone that he has a 60% of surviving if he takes an operation, if he undergoes a medical operation, that he will live and he will be cured, this sounds great. But if you tell them that they have a 40% of dying during the operation, this doesn't sound that great, right? It sounds pretty bad. And the only difference is the way that you framed it, whether you focused on the positive and whether you focused on the negative. In video games, we always frame it as positive, like, right? We never say, you have a 99% chance of not getting this, which, to be honest, sounds a lot worse than you have a 1% chance of getting something. To go back to our previous example, if I just stood here and told you, you know, there's a 99% chance you won't be a millionaire after this talk, you would probably be like, well, yeah, I know, that's not exciting at all, but the 1% is really, really exciting. So the way that we must present this information, that we must talk to players about our systems and about our whole numerical and quantitative setup of the game, really can lead to some expectations being unreasonably high. And this can be great for engagement. It can be pretty, motivating for them to even get in the game and to even get in the end game and to really go through all of this. But it may not be so great for retention, and it can lead to a lot of frustration, which can build up to the point of players feeling bored. So to come back to the beginning of the talk, if they feel like there's nothing they can do to have these chances increased, if they feel like this is a system that has a really low probabilities of everything, then they feel this is a chaotic system that they can't feel, that they can't have fun in, and then that they feel lost in. So obviously, aside from designing perfect quantitative systems that work really well and that get our players from point A to point B to point C in the way that we predicted up to a decimal, we can still have issues that regard the way that players feel in our game. And that's where the human factors really jump in. So what can we do to make them more human-friendly? How can we design a game that's built on chasing, that's built on gaining amazing loot, which doesn't have a lot of chances for dropping or for having these really long player progressions, and still have players that have fun and that feel good about being in our game. Well, there are some steps that we can do to mitigate this, although all these biases are human, and although we all here are aware of them now, we are still subject to them. There are a couple of tactics that we can employ to make people feel better in our game, and one of them is the moderate but likely gains throughout the game. So instead of having a function that works like this, so you have 0 probability of getting anything good, 0, 0, 0, and then it happens and you get amazing loot and you just jump to the top and then continue getting amazing loot because you put in the time. Instead of that, we actually try to build a function that is more linear and positive, where when you start off, you start playing the game, you get moderate gear that's not as great, but it will last you for a while, and you will be happy when you get it. So you build steps. You don't go from 0 to hero. You go from 0 to slowly climbing and getting to the hero status that you want and that you're chasing the whole time. These gains should be likely, and they should not be great in size. They should be moderate, and they should be consistent. This is the one thing that we actually kind of didn't achieve as much in Pagan when it comes to endgame. So we had this great progression up until endgame. People were leveling up, they were getting better gear, everything was great. And then there was this really empty space in the middle between the normal leveling and the endgame, where you get the most amazing gear, where most players hit a wall. And it was a really small space. It was just a couple of missions, but if you wanted to progress those missions, you had to really get amazing gear, and you had to get through it with investing a lot more time than you were previously accustomed to while leveling. The other tactic that you can employ in order to really get through these biases is to give the player regained sense of control. Since we tend to feel that we don't have any agency in chaos, that we don't have any control when things are really messy and when probabilities are really low, you can have special events or special loot gears, whatever you want to do, which boost your chances of getting something that is really rare. So you can have systems in place. Path of Exile does this in a great way, where you have maps which can drop amazing loot, but with a really low difficulty. But if you farm up all of this other stuff and boost these maps, then your chances are boosted as well. And even if this boost is not as big, even if you go for 1% to 2%, which is double, but it's still 2%, players feel better about what you're doing in their game. So they're not just replaying the same content, hoping to God they will get something valuable. They feel like, okay, if I just put in time, if I put in work, I can make this much more achievable, and I can make this whole game much easier for me than it would be previously. So if you both employ the good system design that we've got in the beginning, if you really go through the numerical side of your game, but also through the human and psychological side of your game, you can boost both engagement and retention when your players are playing your game, whether it's mobile, whether it's PC, and whatever other genre. So in conclusion, even the most formal and most quantitative of systems are built for humans, built by humans. So we should never forget that no matter how really hard on the numbers and how precise your system can be in some vacuum, some guy or girl from somewhere will try to sit at their computer and really play through your game and have different feelings regarding your game, not only when it comes to story and cool cinematics and cool music, but also when it comes to your system, to your player progression, to your character building, through battling, through everything. And that's why we have to take into account how actually our cognitive systems are built and how we act on a daily basis. Although most of these biases are irrational, we actually can't ignore them because that's the way we think every day. All of us humans are irrational in the logical, formal sense, and we don't necessarily choose what's mathematically best. We choose what is best for us in that moment. So knowing about all of these biases and knowing how your players work and how humans think can really both boost your KPIs and even make your players feel a lot better while playing your game, which is something that we all strive for and which is something that we all try to do as game designers. That's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
So we have time for questions. So if anybody, we have one here.
How do you feel about pity timers? Whereas there's a mechanic in the game when a player doesn't get any loot for quite a high amount of time, you from a opponent just give them a good item.
Yeah, thank you for your question. This is actually a question that I get a lot regarding the RNG and the pity timers. I personally haven't met a large portion of our audience who really dislikes pity timers because sooner or later people know about them. Like, it's never a secret. You and I know which games have pity timers and how they work, and most of the players do too. I would personally, for our current audience, never design a pity timer because that's not something they want. That's not something that they feel like they work toward. It's, again, a question about control. Like, if they just fail again and again, it's not something that they control. It's not something that they can intentionally do in order to boost their chances. It's something that we're just like, oh, you poor thing, here, have this, you know. But if in many games, this is actually something that drives player engagement and drives player retention, and I would not be against designing it. I just think that our current audiences, the most hardcore ones, which were our target audience, didn't really feel good about having them.
Any other question? Okay, we have, he's closer.
How do you feel about splitting a Sword of Mightness for 100 pieces and give it away piece by piece?
Right.
How do you think about that?
This is a common tactic actually that is used by the first strategy, where, like I talked about, where you have moderate but likely gains, which are just steps to the great unlikely gain. So when you put it into different pieces and have someone tell you, hey, just pick up all of these different pieces, it will take you a little bit of time, but you will surely get it in the end, it does regain the sense of control and it does affect players positively. However, I feel like this works best when it's actually coupled with making your chances of gaining each of those pieces higher. So for example, imagine you had 2 dungeons. One of them will drop the Great Sword of Mightiness as a whole, but you have a really small chance. And you have other dungeons where you can pick up the pieces, which will take a lot more time, but you will surely get it in the end. Like, this is the bet that players really like to have, and it's always best to have, you know, those 2 contrasting ways to play the game. One is like the lottery, you can really get it and it's going to be amazing when you do, but it's not likely. And the other one is the slow but steady path. So I think it's usually a good method just when it's really coupled with this other method as well.
I have one more question here.
Hello.
Hi.
So what is your opinion on, instead of having a 1 in 100 chance of obtaining an item, to have the encounter very hard, so it takes you like 100 tries, but you definitely get the item?
That's very similar to what we just talked about, like getting 100 different pieces and then just climbing to the top, right, through hard and steady work. And I think that's also a really good good strategy, but you know, the thing is, with all of these slow and steady strategies, rarely anybody gets excited about them. You know, when you get a checklist which says, oh, just collect these 100 things and you'll be good. It will take you about a week, but you'll be good. It takes out the, you know, pulling pulling of the handle on the slot machine feeling that is really an integral part of many ARPGs, for example, many looter-based games. So I think that it's a really good way for just when you want to sit down, relax, and work towards something, because it puts you in a state of flow, it puts you in a good mindset. I think it's good to have that, but I think you can't build a game without the betting feeling of, oh, I might be a millionaire in 5 seconds. Yeah. You're welcome.
Cool. I think that's it. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
So we'll have a 1 hour break for lunch, and after we'll be back here.